Alright, welcome back everyone. This is the Happy Toolbox, and today I'm going to be showing you how to do this cool stop motion splash effect using our splash pack that you can find on thehappytoolbox.com. We're going to show you how to put this together. Normally, we try and do tutorials that involve free models or ways you can do it yourself. If you want to model these and do something kind of like it, you can still follow along, but this will be a tutorial specifically around how to use these splash elements to create this stop motion effect, and then also how you can take that, put it inside of a cloner object, and get some pretty cool rain effects going on. If you head on over to thehappytoolbox.com, head on down to Splash Pack. That's where you can buy it at. It's 45 total static mesh models. These are great to throw into your scenes, do illustrations with, and do some pretty cool animations with as well, one of which we are going to show you today. So let's hop on in. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is we are going to go over to our content browser where you have hopefully installed the lib4d file for the splash pack. I have mine here. You can also pull it out of the FBX files that are included in the folder. If you are in R24 or higher, I believe, this might look a little different. I'm still on R21. If you have any specific questions about how to navigate to these or install them, feel free to reach out. So what we're going to need from this pack specifically is, if you scroll down to this splash area, splash 1, 2, 3, we're going to grab splash 2, double click. We're going to grab splash 5, splash 8, and then splash 9. And they're all in these subdivision surfaces, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to crack these open and pull all of these files out, because we'll kind of smooth everything at the end. I'm going to delete these subdivision surfaces. And then the way I want these ordered is the 2, 5, 8, 9, kind of in a row like that. And then I am going to plop all of these inside of a cloner object. And then in this cloner object, we do want linear, but we want the count to be set to 1, so only one of these shows at a time. And if you've seen some of our other tutorials, you know this is a really nice way to cycle through models. So now I have a count of 1. Right now it's an offset of 0. If I go to an offset of 1, you'll see the cloner object changes, and it's kind of going through this stack. So it'll go 2, 5, 8, 9. You'll notice it's raising up in the air, which is not what we want. And how we fix that is right here, we have a Y set of 50 centimeters. So we just want to zero that out. So that way, when we change our offset, it's just kind of nicely cycling through these things. And then what I want to do, if you go back through here, as you saw when I was changing our offset, these objects are kind of jumping around a little bit in terms of the center point. And since they're organic models we created, they kind of have their own axis point that is true center. And that's not ideally what we want right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off this cloner object, and I'm going to hide all the objects, but turn on 8. And then I'm going to turn on 2 as well. And I feel like 8 is a really good one, where it just is such a defined circle in the center. It's basically a dead center object that we should use as our visual center point. So if I turn back on this splash 2, we can kind of see it's off to the right a little bit, or back in Z. And so I just want to push this over a little bit. Okay, there we go. And turn on my cloner object again. So they still look a little off, but if we uncheck fix clone, it will accept our positional changes that we applied to those clones. So now if we step through these, they feel a lot better in terms of being uniform. Okay, so the next thing we want to do for the setup is, again, turn our cloner object off and turn all of our splashes off except for splash 9. And this one, we are actually going to adjust the geometry a little bit because it will be the last one you see, and we want a little secondary motion to happen right at the tail end. So on this splash 9, I'm going to generate a sphere, scale it down, and kind of position it right where this droplet is. And we're just going to use a sphere to make this easier. So I'm going to title this droplet. put it inside of my splash 9 null, hide that, and then on the splash 9, I'm going to go to vertices, select all the vertices of the sphere that's in there, and just delete. And that makes it really easy to work with. We just have this standard sphere, and it's alive, so we can update the geometry if we want. But we're going to use that as the droplet that shoots up with secondary motion at the end. And then what we want to do is we want to duplicate splash 9. So I'm going to control drag on PC, command drag on Mac, and I'm going to label this splash 9B and splash 9A. And let's turn off splash 9A, so we just have splash 9B. And what we want to do is we want to have this centerpiece kind of scaled way, way smaller down, and some of this liquid kind of pushing out farther to the edges. So I'm going to kind of go to a side profile. You can also actually jump over to your full side profile. I'm going to highlight all of these vertices kind of down to this neck position here. And I'm going to turn on enable axis, move this axis down. Enable axis allows you to move the axis around without it actually affecting the position or change any parameters of the object. So I'm going to move this down to kind of the base here, middle of that neck, turn off enable axis, and then I'm going to scale all of this down. And to make this even looking, I'm just going to deselect some of these vertices, scale down more, reposition, deselect, scale down more. What I'm trying to do here is get the idea across that this kind of droplet broke off, so therefore it's not as big anymore and kind of reseeding down into the pool. So I'm just going to make sure this looks pretty good and is smoothed out. UL is a loop selection. I'm going to scale down some of these. So just make sure this looks how you want it to look. I'm just trying to make it look smooth enough so it's believable. Again, this is a stop motion effect, so you can get away with a little shiftier looking geometry, which is nice. But I like to just make sure it looks pretty good. There we go. It's looking pretty good. Got this weird nipple looking thing going on here. And then what I want to do is I want to do another loop selection. So hit UL. And I'm going to start from this kind of second interior ripple, start on the inner edge of that. I'm going to highlight all of these loops. Even highlight the ones underneath to a certain extent. These ones don't matter as much, but it's nice to just keep it kind of uniform. There we go. So our loop selection kind of turns into a pin about here. Okay, and then I'm going to go over to scale, and I'm going to scale this out a little bit. And then again, I'm going to deselect some loops, scale out a little more, deselect a couple loops, scale out. Deselect, scale out. And then maybe right at the end here, I'll actually flatten this down a little bit. And the idea again is this droplet broke off, and then this kind of puddle, because that liquid is dropping back down into it, is extending a little bit and becoming a little wider. And so what we have now is we have splash 9A. If I turn that on, you know, we have this nice big droplet. We have splash B, turns into this tiny droplet, and it's extending a little bit further. And from there, since we have these two model sets, on splash 9A, we want to right click and go to rigging tags. Again, this might look a little bit different if you're an R24 or higher. So I'm going to go to rigging tags and choose a pose morph tag. So at minimum, just search for a pose morph tag. I'm going to apply that to splash 9A. And what I want to have happen is in mixing, I want to select points. And what a pose morph tag does is it allows you to interpolate and tween between two different parameters of the same objects or more. So we chose points because we want to actually morph and tween between the point sets of these two objects. So I have splash 9A pose morph. It says base pose morph, which is basically splash 9A. And then in pose 0, turn down the little caret for advance. You kind of see this target zone. I'm going to drop splash 9B into there. And then I'm going to hide splash 9B. If you click between pose B and A, you can see it's accepted that different geometry. And the important part here is this will not work if you had deleted points or there are not matching point sets on each of these objects. And from here you can see we're in edit mode. So if we go over to animate, it now gives us this slider, and I now have a slider that I can animate between two different poses. And you can do a ton of these. So, you know, if we had a ton of splashes, we could throw them in here. As long as they have the same vertices, we're able to morph between all of these. So there we go. So let's leave it at 0% for now. Now that we have that set up, we have our droplet set up. Let's go ahead and unhide all of these and check on the cloner object. And now let's set up the little droplet kind of coming from the sky, just so we have all of our pieces and parts set up, and then we can dive into the animation work. And you can do pretty much anything you want here. What I did is I just went to my spline tool, went to the side profile, made a spline that looked decent enough. Obviously, this is going to depend on your scene, how far you want this raindrop to fall, etc. I'm just going to kind of zero this out. There's probably an easier way to do this, but this is always what I do. I'm going to position that spline kind of dead center of the view here. And just make sure these are centered. I think we need to move our splash over. There we go. Let's put our spline in the center. And then I went ahead and grabbed a capsule because I kind of wanted this round shape. And then I grabbed in the deformers, I went ahead and grabbed a spline wrap. And in spline wrap, you can basically add a spline. And as long as you stack that under your object, it basically tries to take that geometry and force it to wrap to the spline. I don't want it to stretch along this whole spline. So instead on mode, it's currently set to fit the spline. So I did keep length. And then the axis you can see is kind of flipped wrong. So I want to change that to +Y. And what this allows me to do is I have a spline, I have some geometry. It also gives me this nice offset slider, so I can basically animate that up and down. You just have a nice little rail that this pill object shoots down. And then you still have live geometry that you can adjust. You know, maybe I don't want the radius to be that big. I want it to be a nice little loop. And then we also have keyframeable height, you know, settings. So I could start here from a little droplet, and then as it streaks downward, maybe we animate it a little bit larger. So let's do this. I'm going to set it to be about here. I'm going to hide the spline. I'm just going to call this raindrop. Okay, so now we have this set up. So let's start animating. So I want this raindrop, like I said, to animate down. So I'm going to, on my spline wrap. So around frame 4, let's set our offset keyframe. And then I'm just going to kind of, I don't know, I'll put it out to 20 right now. Offset to 100. See how that's feeling. That's feeling pretty good. Let's do that. It kind of has an ease in, ease out, but I'm okay with that. The speed's feeling pretty good. Obviously, you'd want to output this as a software preview or something like that to see the true speed, but this is feeling good so far. And then what I want to do is I'm just going to make sure that this pill turns off. So on raindrop, I'm going to go to render tags and add a display tag. What I want to do is just check use visibility, put a keyframe there. And then on 19, I'm just going to turn this off. Actually, since we have it go to 20, and then you know what? We probably want this raindrop to hit the floor, so I'm going to change my spline. It's going to change that point, move it upwards, just so it doesn't kind of peek through the floor. Okay, there we go. That's feeling pretty good. Okay, so next what we want to do is our cloner object here. We currently have count set to 1, and so right around this 20 mark, let's set a count to 0, hit a keyframe, and then when I go to 21, since I turn the raindrop off, that's where I want to turn the count to 1. So turning count on and off will basically be how we turn this whole system on and off. And so now you can see we have our raindrop falling, and right when it hits the ground, we turn this splash on. Which looks pretty nice. But what I want to do here is in transform, I want to kind of have this initial splash object scale since it feels pretty intense to immediately go to this. So on 21, let's set this whole cloner object scale in the transform tab to 0.8. So it's a little bit smaller. I'm going to keyframe all of those. And then on 22, let's change it back to 1. So that way it gets a little bit bigger, comes down. You get that nice little scale happening. Okay. And then from there, let's go back to object. And here's where we want to change our offset. So we're basically animating this on 2s, basically, which means every 2 frames we're going to switch this object, roughly, even though we have a little bit secondary motion happening. So I'm going to keyframe the offset here around 22, go to 23, change it to offset 1, and keyframe. But you can see what happens is we have our raindrop coming down, turns off, 1, 2, 3. So, I mean, we're cheating a little bit since we're scaling this, but this splash object is holding for 2 frames. And then we want to do the same thing here on frame 24. Since we want to hold this object for 2 frames, we want to keyframe the offset, go to 25, change the offset to 2, keyframe. All right, looking good. Okay, so then we want to do 26, offset, frame 27, go to our final offset, which is offset 3. And then this is where, instead of doing another offset, we are going to change our pose morph position to get that final animation happening. So it appears on 27. Then let's say on 28, let's keyframe the pose morph. So we're at 0. Let's go into our animate section again on the pose morph tag. Click the slider pose 0. Go over to 29 and ramp this all the way up to 100% and click the keyframe again. Okay, so we have this. It's looking pretty nice. We got that nice little settle happening. But now on these last frames, on 29 to 30, we want that little secondary motion to happen. So we're going to take our droplet, and we're just going to animate the Y value starting on 29 to 30. Just position it down as if it broke off and is kind of falling back towards this main base. Keyframe that. Okay, so we have our little droplet animating down. Zoom in a little. And I know this looks a little bit off. We're kind of animating on different keyframes here, but it gives a little more like jittery stop frame animation right at the end. So there we have that. And then the final piece is going back to our cloner object, the object tab, and on count from around 30, right after this piece drops, so around frame 30, we want to set the count keyframe again. And then 31, just turn it all off. And now what we have, I'm gonna set my timeline to 45, just so it doesn't take so long to wrap. Now we have our raindrop, comes down, boom. Get a nice little stop motion effect going on here. There we go. I think that's looking pretty good. So feel free in here. I mean, again, we're animating on 2s technically, but what's really nice about this setup is you can scale things like I showed you with the transform tab. You can drag things out. So maybe you want something to hold a little longer so you can do some secondary motion on it. Maybe you want to pose morph, you know, some points on here. But overall, it's really nice, really easy to customize. If I pull this out a little bit, you can see we just hold on that frame a little bit longer. Just so it fully depends on your animation and how you want it to feel. But that is pretty much it for the droplet setup. And then the final piece of this that's pretty cool is you can then take this cloner object and raindrop. So I'm going to create a null object, throw all of this inside of that. Shouldn't affect it too much. Yep. Call this raindrop. And then I'm going to create a new cloner object, drag raindrop inside of it, and instead of linear, set it to grid array. So now we have a bunch of splashes happening. Let's say we just set this to 5. So now we have an army of splashes happening all at the same time. Obviously, this doesn't look very good when they're all happening at the same time. So let's space these out a little bit more. Obviously, we didn't have A on the Z. Now we have a bunch going on here. Let's do 6. Just get a little bit more spread. Going to go over on the timeline where they're all showing up. And then what I want is inside of cloner objects, I want a random effector. So you can see they all kind of moved a little bit. What I want to do is not necessarily change the position, so I'm going to uncheck that. If I want to change the scale, change it to a uniform scale, maybe drop this to like 0.16, just so there's a little variation. And then on rotation, I kind of want to turn these around a little bit. Now we have a little variance happening on which side they're happening. So all of these droplets aren't uniformed and aligned. We have a little scale happening. And then also in this random effector, if you go down to time offset, I'm going to change this to about 20 frames. And you can mess with this. You can see how close or how far it is. If you want some drizzle happening, maybe set it to 60. But if I have 20, basically see they're all offset nicely. So it's not all happening at the same time. There's a little bit of scale variation. There's some rotational variation. All right, and that is our final stop motion splash effect. I hope this tutorial helped you guys out and you can use this technique in future projects or just for fun. Again, this cloner stop motion effect works for a lot of similar geometries. If you come up with anything cool, tag us. We'd love to see what you're making at The Happy Toolbox on Instagram. If you like this video and subscribe to our channel, that would help us out a ton. And as always, if you're interested in any 3D model packs, and hopefully you love this splash pack, head on over to thehappytoolbox.com. All right, I'll see you guys next time.